Hello. We are now live with Marcel and Kilani for yet another episode on our live stream. We are viewable on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and of course on our YouTube channel, which is appropriately called Level 5 Partners. And we will be sharing the link with you today as well. So, if you do enjoy these live episodes and you enjoy participating, consider subscribing because, that always, this way you can always get the updates and always know when we are live. Right. So today's topic is, of course, October is Mental Health Awareness Month. And for those of you who have read my books, you know that mental health is a very big part of my life. And growing up, I suffered from clinical depression and anxiety, and it has in many ways in life gotten in the way of a lot of things I wanted to do, but in some ways it's also been kind of a blessing. And that's what we want to talk about today. Really is about the stress and the anxiety and sometimes the depression that each and every one of us probably feels at time. And so if you yourself feel stressed on occasion, this might be a great conversation for you to join.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome back, everyone. It's always great to have you here. As you know, I'm on the same page. I think mental health is such a great topic to talk about, and I think, fortunately or unfortunately, depends how you look at it. I think everyone in this day and age has experience with struggling with their mental health. And the reason I say fortunately or unfortunately, which is probably not the most common way of looking at it, is that, and I'll talk more about this later, is that in my journey with my mental health and learning to work with it and adapt with it, I've learned to kind of see it more as a friend, a tool, and a resource for my own life than a hindrance or something that holds me back. So I think today's going to be a great conversation, knowing that everyone in the world has experience with this topic. And please feel free, as always, to chime in with any comments, questions, whatever else you'd like to say in the chat. We'll pull questions up on the screen and comments, respond to them. And we love to have a bit of an interactive environment here. So with that, let us know if you're joining live in the comments, or if you're watching the replay, comment replay as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and as we jump into this conversation, I mean, there are so many dynamics, right, and so many variables as well, right, with regards to mental well-being, and it makes it sometimes for a more difficult conversation when you want to talk about mental health from an awareness perspective, because there's so much to it. And what's interesting for me, right, is that for many years, I actually didn't know that I suffered from mental illness, and I just thought there was something wrong with me. I literally I just thought I was an idiot. And one of the reasons why I didn't know was because living in society, the ability for us to talk about how we feel is still very limited. And it's quite interesting, because I was having a conversation yesterday with a senior leader, who is appropriately a senior HR leader in a very kind of progressive organization. And she even mentioned to me that that she can never ever in like in a boardroom, or being in a senior kind of stakeholder conversation, talk about that she feels that she's out of her kind of abilities, or that she feels a little overwhelmed, or she feels these type of comments are still considered to be related to being incompetent. And so there is this almost like an unspoken expectation, right, that there are certain things you say and there are just certain things that you don't say about how you feel because, ooh, right? It's like that's going to reflect poorly on your professional image and all of those kind of things. And I was, in many cases, I was the same. I remember, and this is back in the 1980s, so it's a long time ago. But I remember being in a job interview, and actually, it was in 1991, if I remember now. And I was in a job interview, and I was applying for a sales role, and we made it down to the final two candidates, and it was a really it was a pretty big sales role. I was quite excited that I made it that far in the interview process, and we ended up with a casual conversation with who would then be our boss, right? The kind of the senior sales director. And he just kind of says to me, he says, what do you want, right? And I just kind of said, for me, I just want to be happy, right? I don't have a lot of demands in life, but being happy for me has been always a bit of a challenge. And so of course I didn't get the job because you're not allowed to be happy at work, right? Work is serious business. It's like you can't want to be happy. And um and and that and that type of language, right, still exists in corporations today. There is still a resistance that we feel as human beings to be able to talk about how we might feel, right? And I think that's why these awareness conversations and these awareness months are such big conversations, because we have so much more work to do in this space, right? And just asking somebody how they feel, right, can be such a impactful question for some people, permitting that they feel that they can give you an honest answer. You know, and it's amazing how many, and of course, us as coaches, we know, right, how many people blame themselves for feeling incompetent and feeling inadequate and feeling like they as human beings are not enough because they're in an environment where they think really does demand so much of them, even if the organizational structure doesn't. But there's this unspoken expectation that we have of ourselves, that we have to meet a certain standard. And then when we don't meet that standard, then of course, who's to blame? Right? Well, it's me. Right? And it's one of the reasons why for many years, and I was diagnosed with mental health, right, in my late teenagers. And even then, years later, I kind of forgot that I had been diagnosed with mental illness, and just blamed myself for not being able to keep a job, and feeling depressed all the time. And I always say jokingly, when I introduce myself as a coach, I always say jokingly, I've had 13 jobs and been fired from 14 of them. And by the way, of which one of them was my own company. Right? So I know what I'm talking about when it comes down to that, the self awareness and the self management, and the deep embedded stigma that comes to mental health, to a point, right, where, and this is where I'm getting to, is that we don't even necessarily want to recognize it in ourselves. We don't even know that we are struggling ourselves with some form of mental wellness challenge. We just think it's normal. And that's what's become the norm today, is that being stressed out, being anxious, being fearful, all of these kind of things are considered normal in today's society. And how screwed up is that? Right? And so of course there's going to be a lot of dysfunction. And for that reason, of course, you're seeing astronomical numbers of people who are struggling with their mental health on a daily basis. It's incredible when you look at the data. that's coming out, with Gallup surveys, and all of that kind of stuff. But yet there doesn't necessarily seem to be an ongoing conversation, right? There are some organizations that do it, but the majority of organizations don't address this. They're not addressing it in their leadership models. They're not addressing it in their kind of performance reviews and all of those kind of things, and just kind of say, how are you feeling, and what can we do to support you, right, emotionally. And that's a challenge. And I just want to get, because Kilani, you talk a lot with young adults, right? Like, younger professionals. What's your finding on kind of, in this age group, and dealing with, the anxieties and pressures of, trying to figure themselves out in society?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. When you mentioned that anxiety and other mental illness has just kind of become a part of our normal day-to-day life, that really stuck out to me, because one thing that I've noticed through my experience coaching young professionals is almost every single conversation I have, maybe with the exception of one or two, is surrounding something regarding managing stress levels, managing anxiety levels. How do I stop putting pressure on myself? It's all those kinds of conversations. And what's interesting about that is a lot of times they're kind of brushed off conversations. They're kind of, oh yeah, I'm really anxious, I put a lot of pressure on myself. Oh well, everyone else does too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, that's kind of a strange concept, is that it's become normal for us to live in this dysfunctional state of this, when we're anxious, our bodies are not functioning properly. And so that really stuck out to me, that you mentioned that this is something we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and it's kind of become normal, because I'm seeing that, across older generations, but also across my generation too, and that it's just the trend just kind of continues for the
Mm-hmm.
next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And and to me, it's almost, and this is, especially from a coaching standpoint, right? To me, it's like health and well-being is like a spectrum, and this is my own kind of way of framing it. But I look at kind of illness and dysfunction on one end of the spectrum, right? Well-being kind of being in the middle, and then being, high performance being on the other side of that spectrum. And so for many years, for example, when I was working with elite level athletes, we always looked at the athlete where they were on the spectrum, where of course they wanted to be, let's say if it was an Olympian, we wanted them peaking every 4 years. We wanted them, being at that peak level of performance on that right side of that spectrum. But very often they were either somewhere in the middle or even somewhere to the left, right, where they were in a state of dysfunction. They were injured, they were overtrained, they were underfed, they were, whatever that it was. But that draws that spectrum more to the left rather than to the right. And we see the same thing in professionals, right? So the two demographics, right, that suffer the most from the effects of overtraining, which is, of course, we call burnout in professionals. But the two populations are athletes and professionals, you know, and one of the reasons is because we're always pushing the envelope in terms of our performance there. And as a coach, and when I was working with athletes, or when I'm now working with professionals, I my desire, my personal desire, right, is to bring a person from being in the middle of the spectrum to the right side of the spectrum, where they're this high performing being. And one of the problems with that is that, how far to the left of that spectrum are they starting? And because, of course, the further they are to that left side of that spectrum, the longer it's going to take them to get to the right side of the spectrum, which is being that high performing being. And so having that level of awareness with regards to how they're actually feeling and how they're applying themselves, is so extremely critical, because we're we're not going to be able to move the needle very much if they're in a place of dysfunction, more so than a place of high performance, not even necessarily function, right? And unfortunately, I think when people decide to hire a coach, for the most part, is when they are feeling some form of dysfunction in themselves. And what that means is that we're then really only working with people who are kind of on that left side of the spectrum, who are kind of moving to the left. But in reality, right, we want to be moving people to the right side of the spectrum. And so what we find is that a lot of people who would say, who kind of feel like they're okay, who feel like they're normal, they're nowhere near the right side of the spectrum, right? To be a normally functioning human being, going to work every single day, doing your job, doing all of these kind of things. The majority of these people are not on the right side of the spectrum. They're if they're lucky, they're in the middle of the spectrum, where they're just functioning. And it seems that we're okay settling with just functioning, right? It's that, hey, if I can function, if I can keep my job, if I can do all of these kinds, I'm going to be okay.
And
And yeah,
just to clarify what
yeah.
being just functional looks like in this situation, does that mean,
Uh-huh.
like you mentioned, keeping your job, having family, that kind of the basics, or is that being able to function on a higher level without feeling anxiety, without feeling depression, or is it just the the basics, just getting through life essentially?
Yeah, I would. So right in the middle of that spectrum is functioning, and what that means is you're meeting expectations, right? And those expectations can be expectations set on you by the company. It can also be meeting your own expectations. It can be, meeting expectations of society. There are a lot of expectations that we grow up with, that we feel that we have to meet in order to be able to function in life, right? And but nowhere in those expectations is there an expectation that you should be free of anxiety, or free of stress, or free of, kind of chronic stress, right? It's just, those aren't measures of success. It's yeah. And it kind of reminds me of maybe going slightly off topic, but remember, this summer when we were in Canada and we were in Toronto, and you and I were having a conversation with a homeless guy, and he was the happiest human being on this planet. And he was like, man, I am having the best day ever. And I'm like, why? He says, well, I was on the bus and somebody just gave me $5 out of the blue. Like how much more awesome will your day get, right? And and he and and it was quite interesting, because a lot of people would look at somebody like that and say, well, this person is dysfunctional, or they're not, but in his own mind, he has his own standard of success. And he's probably one of the few people who's probably kind of anxiety free, right? Because he's living according to his own expectations and his own standards. And even though he set his standards very low, for himself, it works for him. And I think many of us wake up every single day having this expectation that we're either putting on ourselves, or that we're trying to meet from society, or that's through our education system, or through the job that we have. And the narrative becomes, as long as I can get through my day. And to me, that is nowhere near being on the right side of that spectrum of being a high performing being. And that's always something that I found fascinating, is that there in so many people, I'm not saying everybody, but in so many people, there's a resignation there, that people are just resigning to the fact that this is what life is, and this is how life is, and this is it for me, rather than kind of saying, hey, what is it about me that's settling, that's saying, hey, I'm okay being on this, in this middle of the spectrum. What could it take for me to actually be able to get myself to the right side of that spectrum? And of course there's a lot involved in getting yourself to that high performing state, right? And a large part of that is managing your own narrative and managing your mental well-being, because without that mental drive, something I always say is if it doesn't happen in the mind, it's not going to happen in the body. And so if the mind is in a resignating mindset, the body will be too, and we're not going to get any action towards being that highly driven being that we deserve to be. And every single one of us, and this is what I find most interesting, right, is that every single one of us is born to be kind of a high performing being. And I like to I use the Ferrari as an example, right? As if we're all born to be Ferraris, if that's kind of what you would consider a supercar, right? And of course, opinions on that might vary. But as an example, we're all born, the moment we come out of our moms, we're designed to be a supercar. But whether we actually live up to that supercar as an adults really depends on how we treat that supercar. And think about the type of fuel that you put into that supercar, right? Are you sending it for regular maintenance checks? And if you're buying gas and the price of gasoline goes up, and you say, you know what, I think for this time I'm just going to go with the leaded stuff rather than the high ether, kind of high performance gasoline, that's already going to affect the performance of the Ferrari, right? And so the type of fuel you're putting in that Ferrari, what you're doing with it, if you park the Ferrari in a garage and you just drive it to work every day, right? And all you do is just go to work and you come home and you don't do anything other than that with it. After a while, right, it's going to create grooves in the engine that allow it to only be comfortable going to work, and it becomes very much more difficult for that car to perform like a supercar on the highway and all of that kind of stuff, right? And the same counts for its wheels and its and all of those kind of things, like the tires, it's like, what is it, like 22-inch tires, right? Those things, when they need replacing, they're really expensive. They cost thousands of dollars per tire, right? And if you're like, well, I don't have the budget for that now, and it's like, all I need to do is get work with it. I'm going to put 18-inch wheels on this thing because all I need to do is get to work every day. And so you're putting 18-inch wheels on your Ferrari, and you're putting poor quality gas in the car because it's cheaper and all of those kind of things. And then you have this expectation that your Ferrari still has to be able to perform like a Ferrari because you're like, well, I am a Ferrari, I have to perform like a Ferrari. But there's nothing there in the way that Ferrari is treated that's going to allow it to perform on that right side of that spectrum of the Ferrari that it's designed to be. And each and every one of us is exactly the same. We are all designed to be high performing beings, but when we treat ourselves as something less than that, then we become something less than that. And that is always what I find most painful. And I was there, right? Being diagnosed with mental health, I know what it's like to settle. And I wasted many, many years thinking, well, this is it for me, right? It's like I do have mental illness. I do have, clinical depression and anxiety, and there's nothing I'm going to be able to do about that. And until I learned that there was, right, and that's a shame, because I think we all live in a form of I would say mental disability rather than mental ability. The moment that we settle and that we resign to the fact that this is it for us, right? And that's something that I always find a bit of a shame, because that is also a form of mental health. That is because we need optimal mental health in order for us to be optimally performing beings. And so what I also notice is that a lot of organizations, right, they want to hire Ferraris, but then they want to put 18-inch wheels on them and give them poor gasoline and do all of these kind of things, but still expect them to perform like Ferraris. And then when that Ferrari breaks down, they kind of go, well, that's weird. It's like, why is my Ferrari breaking down? I paid all this money for this Ferrari, but it's breaking down again. It's like, oh, I guess my Ferrari is incompetent. might as well get a new one. And then the same thing happens over and over again, and we're not looking at our human workforce, right, as these Ferraris that have the potential to all function like Ferraris, permitting that they're giving the opportunity to perform like Ferraris, right? And that's something I always find very striking. It's almost like, a lot of companies are kind of saying, you know what, I'm okay with you performing like a Toyota. You don't have to perform like a Ferrari. I bought a Ferrari, but you don't have to perform it. Just perform like a Toyota, and we're going to be fine. We're going to function as an organization. We're going to make money. We're going to do all of these kind of things. And so, let's keep it there. And we see that kind of going all the way through organizations, all the way up into senior leadership levels, who make decisions about budgets and all of those kind of things, is one of the first areas still where people, where companies cut, is on their people. It's on, it's like we're not promoting anybody anymore. Just yesterday I had a conversation with somebody who was promised a promotion in January and was going through all the preparations for it. And then, of course, because of this potential recession that's coming up, the profit projections, not even earnings, just the profit projections, weren't as large as what the company thought it was going to be. And so the company put a freeze on all promotions, right, that were promised, because God forbid we don't make the profit that we actually hope that we were going to do. And then of course that starts a slow decline of a company's potential, because if we're not, at least not keeping our promises to our people, and we're not investing in our people, how can we outperform expectations? How can we expect ourselves to outperform expectations? And we do this time and time and time again, right? And I was actually, when we went through COVID, what was so interesting was that the companies that actually did invest heavily in their people, that really do, because there are plenty of companies, of course, that do, and that did do that. Those were the companies that flourished. Those are the companies that were most innovative. Those were the companies that could pivot in their industries and do extremely well in this whole new world of functioning in a heartbeat. And it was their people that did that. It wasn't their systems and their finances and it was literally their people that stood up and did something about that. And so if we're not learning that lesson on the long term, what is that going to say about kind of the future organizations that we're going to be building, right? And of course we talk about this in our book, right? The new book, right? Is that leadership for the future generations is going to have to be different. We have to look differently at things like mental health and mental well-being. It's the organizations that invest in their people, that invest in their well-being of their people in that way, in a consistent basis, not as a tick of the box where they say, hey, look, we have mental health initiatives, yay, we're doing a great job, but literally that we're taking care of each other is ingrained in the culture of the organization. And being able to leverage and lean on each other, right? That is what's critical for the future. And that's what I anticipate is going to be the game changer, right, in leadership in the future. Is that your generation, Kilani, right, is a generation that I think is going to be way more picky, and I think that's also a generation of people who know that they are Ferraris, right? They know that they were born Ferraris, and they want to be treated like a Ferrari, and they want to perform like a Ferrari. They don't want to settle, with just being treated like they're a Toyota, even though they're a Ferrari. And so I do anticipate that in the next 5 to 10 years, those organizations that are able to make a shift with this and are able to really kind of create cultures of care, right? Cultures that care, for each other and leverage on each other and create a different type of leadership model that is not top down directed like what we see in so many organizations today. Those are the organizations where we're going to have a support system for mental health and mental and actually mental excellence, right? Because it is possible to set up a human being to have optimal mental performance. I wrote that in my first book, right? Is headstrong performance. So that's what that's about. Is how do you set up your brain for optimal performance? And it's not rocket science. It's neuroscience. But it's not an impossible task to set people up for success. And yet it's something that we ignore every single day, right? Because we're stuck in our operations, we're stuck in our work, and we just want to get work done and go home and function, right? And so it becomes this everlasting loop of conversations around, as an organization, what am I going to do, right? Do I want an organization of Ferraris, or do I want an organization of Ferraris that perform like Toyotas? And if the answer is the latter, then keep doing what you're doing. But if you have an organization that wants to perform like the Ferrari that you deserve to be, then you got to start treating your people like they're Ferraris. And what does that involve? That involves investing, right, tremendously and not just in money, but in time and energy and effort in the culture. And it's remarkable, those companies that do that, right, that really do apply themselves that way, the remarkable innovations and creativity and performance that actually comes out of those organizations. But unfortunately, those are also, very few, far in between. And that's why, the book Blind Spot that just came out from the Gallup research, right? The interviewing 5 million people. That's kind of one of their biggest findings. Is the same. Is that companies are still missing the mark. Leaders are still missing the mark on what's actually important, and that's crazy to me. We don't need to be missing the mark on it. It is. We're now at a point, I think, where you almost have to consciously miss the mark. You almost have to purposely not see it, right? Because it's so in your face. There is so much data. There's so much information. There's so much, you almost have to just willingly not look at it so that you can ignore it, right? And it kind of reminds me of that movie Don't Look Up, right? And it's like, let's just not pay attention to stuff that's relevant, because at least now we're still being able to function, right? And I think with regards to mental health, there's still too many companies and too many leaders that are not looking up. They're not looking at that critical, element that is so necessary in their organizations functioning. And of course, only time will tell, what that's going to mean for these organizations in the long run with regards to adaptability, hireability, attrition rates, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, very interesting stuff for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to point out that the managers and people in leadership roles who are responsible for treating their employees and their team members like a Ferrari rather than a Toyota, as you mentioned. I think it's also important that we recognize that they themselves are under a lot of pressure too. And the reason why I say that is because from above them, they're being told you need to produce results. And when we're told that, our brains automatically go to results, which for some reason we've been taught to believe means push your team harder, make them work longer hours, you work longer hours, sacrifice everything, right, do all the work. But I'm going to give you a little life cheat here and work cheat here, and that you probably know already and that we've been talking about for the past 34 minutes. But doing the work that you keep pushing off and that doesn't feel important, and doing the work that you say you don't have time for or isn't a priority. And by that work, I mean taking care of your mental health, of your team's mental health, giving them the breaks that they need, giving them the fuel that they need as the Ferraris that they are. that's what's going to actually create those results that you're looking for. Because as you mentioned, you can't produce or you can't run like a Ferrari if you don't have what a Ferrari needs to run. So even though it seems like when you're caught up in the stress of things, and we both know this too, we've both been there, when you're caught up in the stress of things, it's hard to remember to go back to the basics, to the building blocks, but that's actually where you have to start in order to make the change. Otherwise, anything else, if your team's burnt out and tired and exhausted, and then you're pushing more on them, we all know that doesn't work, right? So when we take the time to really step back, do the work, build yourselves back up to where you need to be, now you can start doing the work, and you can start doing it intentionally. So you're actually going to be producing a lot more in a lot less time, which is ultimately what we all want, right?
Yeah. So and thank you for summarizing that, because that was so spot on, and it kind of reminded me as well, right? Is that we have a tendency to expect our people to perform like Ferraris, but we don't want to treat them like Ferraris, and that happens at every layer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And maybe that even happens at every layer of society. Maybe that even happens in your family. Right. Is that we have an expectation of our siblings and of our kids, for example, to, perform like Ferraris, but it's, we're giving them, cornflakes and Cheetos for breakfast. Right. It was like, that's not Ferrari food. Right. And but you have to perform well in school. Right. And it's and it is interesting. I don't think we actually really understand the impact, right, of how, treating that when we treat each other like Ferraris, that we all get to benefit from performing like Ferraris, because I think we all want to initially, right? Like inherently, because we're all designed to be one,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think when given the opportunity, would love to perform like one, but if we're not treating each other like we are Ferraris in the first place, but we're treating each other like we're something less, and we're not deserving of being treated like a Ferrari, our people are going to perform less than a Ferrari, and then we get upset, right? And then that's the funny thing, that's that expectation, and then we get upset because number one, we're not performing like Ferraris because whoever is expecting it from us isn't treating us like a Ferrari, right? And so then we become upset at ourselves because we want to perform like Ferraris. And so that's where a lot of the pressure and a lot of the stress thing comes from, is because I want to perform like a Ferrari, but how do I do it? And at the same time, though, it's also about, like, when I'm then treating my people and my family and my loved ones, I'm not treating them like Ferraris either. Right. I'm kind of, what's kind of interesting. I'm not giving you the fuel. I'm not setting you up for success to perform like a Ferrari. On the contrary, I'm kind of telling you have to perform like a Ferrari, but you have to do it with 18-inch wheels. Right. And then, and kind of expect the world to be able to function. And then somewhere along the line, there's rationality in that, which is nuts. Right? If you think about it, right? If we break it down in that kind of, in a simple way. And so maybe that could be kind of a good learning lesson from today's session, right? Is number one is, are you being set up by whoever it is that you live with, work with, right? Your family, whatever, are you being given an opportunity to perform like a Ferrari? That's number one, right? Are you being set up that way? And if not, and if you're not being set up like a Ferrari, do you have the courage to have a conversation about that? Right? Say, kind of, hey, why am I not being set up like a Ferrari? Right. Number two is, are you setting your people up for as to be able to perform like Ferraris? Right. And whether it's your own family members or your your team, right? The people that you work with, right? Are you going out from the assumption that they are perfectly designed Ferraris, and all you need to do is just provide them with the fuel that they need to perform, as Ferraris, and then let them perform, right? Or are you taking their wheels off and putting 18-inch wheels on them too, and then yeah, you have to perform like a Ferrari. You're not going fast enough, and you're not doing well enough. So it's like, hey, I got my training wheels on. How am I supposed to, supposed to function, and maybe in there lies the dysfunction, right? Is that the dysfunction really is what if we treat each other all like the Ferrari that we were designed to be, and give each other the fuel and the wheels and all of that kind of stuff that's to be able to function like one, and then celebrate the fact that we're all able to perform like Ferraris. And if we can also have the people in our lives do the same with us, that would be incredible, right? So maybe that's the leadership of today is, everybody that's in your organization is already a Ferrari, but have you put 18-inch wheels on them rather than the 22-inch wheels? And are you giving them the right type of fuel to perform like Ferraris? And then on top of that, are you expecting them to perform like Ferraris, with 18-inch wheels? That could be a great analogy to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great takeaway from today's session. And please let us know what your takeaways are for all of our listeners. Feel free to drop it in the chat, or if you want to message us privately what your takeaway is, feel free to do that too. As we say, we're always open for conversation. If you want to talk about your day, you want to talk about what we talked about here today, you're more than welcome to message us. And as always, go check out our YouTube channel. We're still giving away some free stuff, some really cool free stuff too for our first 100 subscribers. Do you have the count or estimated count of where we're at right now?
It's on the YouTube channel. Oh, wait, I have it open. I can see. I think we are right now. We are at 39 subscribers.
Okay, perfect.
Woo-hoo. Yeah.
So we have another 60 or so to go for if you want a free course on the introduction to the 5 energies, which is a system that we use for our clients to help them produce more in less time. So if you want to get a peek into that, if you haven't heard us talk about it before, it's usually a paid course, but we're giving it away for free to our first 100 YouTube subscribers.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Well, that was it for me. How about you, Kilani? You got anything to add?
Nope, that's all for me. I think this is always a great topic to talk about. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right, no worries. And thank you so much again for watching this episode. And we will see you in the next one, which will be in a few weeks. We are off to Hawaii on vacation, talk about mental health. There are some waves with our name on it that we're going to enjoy for a week. But we're after Hawaii. We're going to be back and refreshed, and with a whole new mental state for ourselves as well, getting back into it. And we will see you live in a few weeks' time. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you. Okay. Bye.